In a concrete bunker beneath the Bendler block in Berlin, Colonel FriedrichzWeber laid 3 intelligence reports side by side and felt the blood drain from his face. The numbers were impossible. America had shipped over 300,000 military vehicles to the Allies while simultaneously fighting a 2-ocean war against Japan. The Third Reich's entire motor vehicle production for 1,943 hadn't even reached 100,000 units. Colonel FriedrichzWeber had spent his entire adult life with numbers. Before the war, he'd been an economics professor at Heidelberg University, specializing in industrial production metrics. His 1,936 dissertation, Comparative Manufacturing Capacity in Modern European States, had earned him quiet recognition in academic circles and, more dangerously, the attention of Wehrmacht intentions. By March 1943, Weber directed a small analytical section within the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, the Armed Forces High Command. His office occupied a cramped corner of the Bendler block, the massive stone building on Berlin's Landwehr Canal that housed Germany's military nerve center. Unlike most intelligence officers who focused on enemy troop movements in battle order, Weber's mandate was clear: tracked Allied industry output and logistical capacity. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. It was tedious work, unglamorous. While other officers briefed senior commanders on dramatic frontline developments, Weber compiled spreadsheets of factory production figures, shipping methods, and railway asset estimate. And reports rarely made it beyond mid-level czar operations. The prevailing wisdom among German high command remained what it had been since 1941. America was industrially impressive but strategically incoherent, its production capacity dilated by supply both European and theaters, one defending own continental, Afghan, whether followed bleed and a written much in February 1942 on arco-industrialization, impressive scale, limited strategic impact. The report had been well received. It confirmed what everyone wanted to believe, that American production, while substantial, would be insufficient to fundamentally alter the war's trajectory in Europe, while Japanese forces tied down American military resources across the Pacific. But on March 18, 1943, 3 separate intelligence reports landed on Weber's desk within hours of each other, and the comfortable certainty he'd maintained for over a year began to track. The first report came from Abwehr agents operating in Lisbon. Portugal's capital remained one of the few neutral zones where German intelligence could still function with relative freedom. A Portuguese dockworker, recruited for modest monthly payments, had photographed shipping manifests at the port of Lisbon. Allied convoys occasionally stopped there for refueling before continuing to North Africa or Britain. The manifests detailed cargo: 4,300 American-manufactured trucks aboard a single Liberty ship convoy bound for British forces in Egypt. Weber had stared at that number. 4,300 trucks and 1 convoy. He and moved automatically to reference files. Germany's entire truck production for February 1943 had been 3,847 units, and though had to supply the Eastern Front, the Mediterranean theater, occupation forces, and homeland defense. The second report arrived from a captured base logistics officer, interrogated a POW society outside Frankfurt. The British captain, a Plico officer taken prisoner during the Kasserine Pass battle in Tunisia, had been remarkably forthcoming during fortune. Perhaps it seemed legit and inflation held no tact for vain. Perhaps he'd simply wanted to boast. Either way, his testimony contained a revelation that Weber found deeply disturbing. The British officer described the volume of American vehicles sowing in North Africa with the ports of Oran and Casablanca. Hundreds of trucks arrived daily, he said. Jeeps, cargo trucks, amphibious vehicles, tank transport and half-trained. The Americans manufacture them faster than we can distribute them. We got notables that apply both automobile factories. The interrogator, unaware of the statement's significance, had filed the report routinely. But when it crossed Weber's desk, He'd immediately cross-referenced it with captured Allied vehicle identification numbers from destroyed or abandoned equipment in Tunisia. The Ving sequences suggested production dates ranging across barely 3 months, January through March 1943, yet encompassed over 2,000 individual vehicles already documented in North African theater operations. The third report came from the Luftwaffe Reconnaissance Analysis Section. German aerial photographies British ports Liverpool, Southampton, Bristol revealed something that Weber's analyst mind immediately recognized as significant. The ports were crowded with vehicles, not ships, vehicles. Thousands of trucks, jeeps, and armed cars staged in Mev marshalling yard, waiting for transport across the channel. What were the ways? What aimed Weber went just wind evabeling the freegeist. It was the tunnel the rate. Can Enfweitens taken 3 weeks apart showed almost complete replacement of staged vehicles. The previous vehicles had clearly shipped out. New ones had taken their places. The implication was staggering. American production wasn't just supplying current operational needs. It was building up reserves, stockpiles, a logistical cushion that would allow sustained operations without production interruptions. Weber spent that evening doing calculations. He cross-referenced every piece of vehicle production intelligence his section had compiled over the previous 18 months. He analyzed shipping capacity data, convoy schedules, and port throughput estimates. He calculated production rates based on captured vehicle identification sequences. He estimated losses to U-boat activity infected in vehicles diverted to Pacific operations. The numbers that emerged made no sense according to everything German planners understood about industrial capacity allocation. According to Weber's calculations, and he checked them 3 times, American vehicle production allocated to the European and North African theaters alone had already exceeded 180,000 units by March 1943, and this was while America simultaneously supplied its Pacific operations, maintained homeland defense, and built up reserves for future operations. The figure seemed impossible. Germany total military vehicle production for of 1942 had been approximately 115,000 units, and only when fighting the Ocean War, the entire Wehrmacht Eastern Front, North Africa, Western Europe, Apocalypse to share the 415,000 vehicles. Yet American, according to Weber's analysis, had already supplied nearly twice that number to just 2 theaters in roughly 15 months, while simultaneously conducting major operations across the entire Pacific. Weber compiled his findings into a 12-page report titled Preliminary Assessment, American Automotive Production Capacity and Strategic Implications. He submitted through preparations on March 23, 1943. The report disappeared into the Wehrmacht bureaucracy. Weber heard nothing for 2 weeks. On April 6, 1943, Weber was summoned to a briefing room on the Bendler block's 3rd floor. 3 officers sat waiting. Major General Ernst Müller from the Operations Directorate, Colonel Hans Dietrich from Logistics Planning, and Captain Otto Schneider, an aide-de-camp to Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, Chief of the Wehrmacht High Command. Weber entered with his report folder and statistical appendices. He'd prepared to defend his findings with data and methodology. General Müller spoke first, his tone polite but dismissive. Colonel Weber, what reviewed your report on American vehicle production? Your analysis contains some interesting observations. However, the figures you presented seem to exceed what our own technical experts consider plausible, given known American industrial capacity. Weber had expected resistance. General, my calculations are based on direct physical evidence capture vehicle identification numbers, convoy manifests, aerial con port fidelity, then equant and known of yen. More weight hen. But cathedral source reliability. Apartes dick wicca CRS, a captured British officer's boasting. These are not what we would call definitive intelligence. The Ving sequences are definitive. Weber and Este. Each captured or destroyed American vehicle as manufactured. Around they keep action dates and factory locations. By analyzing the sequence progressions, we can calculate production rates with considerable accuracy. Colonel Dietrich leaned forward. He was a logistics specialist. Son and Weber hoped Mike understand the implications. Eva accepting your methodology, Colonel. You conclude in strain credibility. You claim in America Rag led nearly 200,000 military vehicles to theaters where they'll someday fight in the Pacific, not claiming, Colonel. Calculating. By Auburn. But pretend the incoherent, Dietrich contained. Is America possessing such enormous production capacity? Why hasn't it translated into decisive battlefield superiority? We held North Africa for months. The Eastern Front remains stalemate. Why is this supposed industrial colossus you're describing? It was the logic conjecture. The reason to report seemed plausible in to him. The Fantals have been subbiled, he said. Can't intelligence surpass massive world spiral state in Brazil. The Americans aren't deploying everything they've shipped. They're building up capacity for a shipped operation. More expression hardened. Speculation. Informed projection based on observed inventory patterns. Captain Schneier, who remained silent until now, spoke carefully. Colonel Weber, are you aware of Reich Marshal Goering's assessment of making this ship capacity? He's been quite clear that while America can produce consumer goods in impressive quantities, they lack the technical expertise and industrial focus to manufacture military equipment at scales that would threaten Germany's strategic position. That was the real reason for this meeting. Weber's report contradicted not just operational assumptions but ideological certainty. Goering had repeatedly proclaimed that Americans could make refrigerators and razor blades, but not tanks and trucks in quantities that mattered. I'm aware of the Reich Marshal's public statements, Weber said carefully. However, the physical evidence suggests a different reality. I'm not questioning anyone's judgment. I'm simply reporting the data indicates. The data may be flawed, Moose suggested, or deliberately planted. The British are quite capable of manipulating shipping metaphors to exaggerate their supply situation, making us believe they have greater reserves than they actually possess. Weber considered this possibility. I've cross-referenced multiple independent sources. The Patriot's assistant to of them are in front like Mars in North Africa. Their plotting cadre Yuri Harnungs of the American vehicle in excellent condition, situation and replacement capacity. Front-eye impressions are notoriously unreliable, Dietrich counted. A commander facing enemy vehicles naturally overestimates their numbers. It's a known psychological effect. The meeting continued for another 40 minutes. For every piece of evidence Weber presented, his superiors offered alternative explanations. The data was unreliable. The sources were compromised. The calculations made unwarranted assumptions. American vehicles were likely such poor quality that high production numbers were necessary to compensate for rapid breakdown rates. When Weber pointed out that captured American trucks showed remarkable build quality and durability, Miller suggested this was selection bias. Only the best examples survived to be captured. When Weber referenced the Liberty ship program's documented production capacity and calculated vehicle transport capability, Schneider noted that many Liberty ships were undoubtedly being sunk by U-boats before reaching their destinations, making theoretical capacity irrelevant. Every ejection was superficially reasonable. Each had explanation of some plausibility. Taken individually, a single Pete Weber's hands and bequester no reinterpreted. But Weber understood statistics. He understood that when multiple independent data strings all pointed toward the same conclusion, the cumulative probability of that conclusion being correct increased exponentially. The likelihood that all his sources were simultaneously wrong, that all the evidence was coincidentally misleading in the same direction, was vanishingly small. Yet his superior seemed determined to interpret each piece of evidence in isolation, finding reasons to doubt each one without considering the pattern they formed together. The meeting ended with polite dismissal. General Muller thanked Weber for his diligence. Colonel Dietrich suggested that perhaps Weber's section should focus more on immediate technical intelligence rather than broad strategic assessments. Captain Schneider said nothing but made a note in his leather portfolio. Weber left the briefing room, knowing his report would be filed away and forgotten. The Wehrmacht High Command had received information that contradicted their strategic functions, and rather than adjust those assumptions, they'd found reasons to eject the information. It was. Weber resected as he walked back to his cramped office. Exactly what he've done our position 6 months earlier. Comfortable certainty always more appealing than stabbing possibilities. Weber conceived upping the matter. His free prospects in Wehrmacht intelligence depend on producing reports that they and commanders found useful, which generally meant it was that confirmed what they already believed. An analyst who persistently advocated uncomfortable conclusions was unlikely to advance, regardless of how well supported those conclusions might be. But Weber had spent his professional life in pursuit of truth through numbers. Academic training had instilled in him the principle that conclusions must follow evidence, not vice versa. The evidence of American industrial capacity kept accumulating, and it kept pointing in the same direction. Throughout pointing in the summer 1943, Weber continued compiling data, though he stopped writing full reports. His filing cabinet filled with photocopy shipping mythite, interrogating transcript, reconnaissance photographs, and critical documentation. Each one entered clear and one stirring. A main intelligence 33 report 3 Allied convoy to unprecedented size moving through entire wars. A single convoy comprised 47 merchant vessels, 32 of which were identified as American Liberty ships. Assuming standard cargo load, that single convoy could transport approximately 15,000 military vehicles. A June interrogation of a captured American truck driver from the 1st Infantry Division revealed that his unit's entire motor pool, over 200 vehicles, had been replaced within a 3-month period. Notre de Condretlasses with thinly due to null, where the old vehicles were sent to rear echelon units. The casual abundance that implied stacked Weber. German units kept vehicles operational through cannibalization field repairs for years. The American highly conceived 3-methyl trucks ready for recon. July-April aerial recasses for Ras of the Thuria Huya Russian ports, Romansk-Lonkinschel. June Suton Terpetlis documented thousands of American knife-footed trucks staged at these Arctic ports. The implications were profound. America was simultaneously supplying Britain, supporting operations in North Africa and Italy, maintaining Pacific operations, building up reserves for future European campaigns, and sending substantial vehicle quantities to the Soviet Union through the dangerous Arctic convoy route. The tonnage calculations are low themed in Plutboy. Out there were the photographs, showing endless rows of American trucks bearing Soviet markings. Weber created a new filing system. For each month from January 1942 through July 1943, he compiled all available intelligence on American vehicle deliveries to Allied forces. He categorized by theater: Britain, North Africa, Soviet Union, Pacific. He calculated minimum numbers based on documented evidence and maximum probable numbers based on shipping capacity and production indicators. Even his most conservative estimates produced figures that dwarfed German production. His more realistic calculations suggest an America had delivered over 250,000 vehicles to Allied forces worldwide by mid-1943. Germany's cumulative military vehicle production to the same period was approximately 185,000 units. And Germany had been on war footing since 1939, had captured significant vehicle stocks from conquered territories, and wasn't fighting across 2 oceans simultaneously. The arithmetic was impossible to escape. America was outproducing Germany in military vehicles by a margin of at least 30–40%, possibly more, whilst producing Germany in aircraft by thinner margins, and ships by outraming margins, and maintaining a civilian economy that continued producing consumer goods at levels Germany hadn't seen since before the war. Weber sat in his office on the evening of August 12, 1943, looking at 2 years' worth of compiled data. He'd created a massive wall chart in his small office, tracking every data point he'd collected. The pattern was undeniable. America possessed industrial capacity on a scale that German planners had fundamentally failed to comprehend. The implications for Germany's strategic position were catastrophic, and no one in the Wehrmacht High Command wanted to hear about it. If you find the story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. Apps can produce in-depth content like this. General Kurt von Schelling had commanded panzer divisions in France, led armed thrusts deep into the Tarpre, and earned the Knight's Cross at Obrins at Kharkov. By up to 1943, he had been reassigned to position beneath his capabilities, inspected and led panzer forces the Western defense. The Queen came them with the title and mean authority. Von Schelling's actual job was to tour Atlantic Wall fortifications and assess Germany's armed readiness for the Allied invasion everyone knew was coming eventually. He was 53 years old, recovering from wounds received on the Eastern Front, and increasingly aware that his new position existed primarily to keep experienced but physically compromised officers away from active combat commands. He approached the combat with professional thoroughness anyway. Throughout October and November 1943, von Schelling traveled the French and Belgian coasts, inspecting fortifications, reviewing Fenty plans, and examining the panzer divisions tasked with repelling the inevitable Allied landing. What he find stube, more would eat pause and weak. Atlantic war through is imprithry, and Preethy's massive country bunchage, intricate trench and elaborate obstacles stretching from walls, but from Schelling's trained eye recognized something his superiors seemed to have missed. Fortifications with without mobile reserves to contain breaches and counterattack. Germany's armed strength in the West was inadequate. Von Schelling counted 17 Panzer and Panzer Grenadier divisions nominally signed to weaken defense. On paper, his seemed serial. In reality, may want a strength equipped with obsolete tanks, or positioned too far inland to respond quickly to coastal landings. More troubling's the fuel situation. During inspection of the 12th SS Panzer Division near Kern, von Schelling learned its division possessed fuel for approximately 150 kilometers of operations, barely enough to move from current positions to Pupantu landing site, and conduct one-sided combat operations. Off the land, the division would be mobilized, waiting for fuel supplies that would have to travel through transportation networks the Allies would certainly target. Von Schelling was attacked to market. He thought the panzer divisions with fuel were merely stationary gun placements. He began asking uncomfortable questions. Where were the fuel reserves? How quickly could they be transported to combat zones? What were contingency lines with Allied air power interdicted supply routes? The answers were vague and unconvincing. Fuel was adequate for current planning assumptions. Transportation arrangements were being finalized. Alternative supply routes existed, but required coordination with multiple command authorities. In December 1943, von Schelling and a planning conference in Paris, seeing Wehrmacht commanders gathered to further defensive preparations. The move was confident. The Atlantic Wall would channel Allied forces into two killing zones. German tanks with strike landing beaches before me forces to Kinsade. Artillery would devastate troops weighing shore. The Luftwaffe would contest Allied superiority. Von Schelling listened to potential, outlying how German forces would defeat the invasion. No, the Präsentieren zuisling twist to fundamental questions kitting wing night. What if the Allies landed with force levels that overwhelmed defensive capacity through sheer material abundance? During a break, von Schelling found himself speaking with Colonel FriedrichzWeber, intelligence analyst at WWII. Weber had been invited to polite industrial production Thailand. That section would informally part of the conference agenda. You look traveled, General. Weber observes. Von Schelling later it. I'm worried we're planning to fight the invasion we want rather than the invasion we'll face. Tell me honestly, Colonel, what are your estimates of Allied material strength for the coming invasion? Weber hesitated. My estimates or the official estimates? Yours. Weber glanced around to ensure they weren't overhead. The Allied will land with vehicle support on scale we cannot match. Conservative estimate. They'll bring ashore 50,000 vehicles in the first 2 weeks. Realistic estimate, possibly 80,000. They have the shipping capacity, the production capability. They've been stockpiling in Britain over a year. Von Schilling nearly took a cigarette. 80,000 vehicles? In 2 weeks? That's based on documented shipping capacity and zot British product if the Americans alone have over 300,000 vehicles to Allied forces since 1942. A large percentage are staged in Britain awaiting the invasion. 300,000 vehicles? Von Schilling's voice abrupt to barely whisper. Colonel, do you realize what you're saying? Germany's total production over the same period. I'm aware, General. I've written multiple reports on the subject. They've been consistently dismissed as overstated. Von Schilling absorbed this. His tactical mind they grasped the implications. If Weber's figures are even approximately correct, the Allies sustain logistical operations at rates German forces couldn't possibly met. They could replace losses faster than Germany could inflict in. They could maintain advantage sushing material abundance. Even if German defenders fought brilliantly, why haven't your reports received more attention? Von Schilling asked. Weber smiled bitterly. People prefer comfortable conclusions to disturbing evidence, because accepting mine eyes would require nudging we facing industrial capacity. We currently con through fighting spirit, war tactic heads because at present Germany can't win its war through military operations alone. You're describing strategic defeat as inevitable. I'm describing mathematical reality, General. Numbers don't care about ideology or tonation. If one side can replace 3 tanks for every one the other side is free, simple arithmetic determines the outcome, regarding which side has better soldiers of tactics. Von Schilling said to Zinat sides. If thing of combat to know the war when won by Tapiri Kari Lane. Logistics mattered. Industrial capacity mattered. The side that could keep more tanks running, more trucks moving, more artillery firing, inevitably won wars of attrition. He'd assumed that Germany's technical expertise and combat experience would offset Allied material advantages. But if those material advantages were as overwhelming as Weber suggested, no amount of technical skill or technical brilliance would matter. Why are you still compiling these reports if no one listens? Von Schilling asked. Because someone should maintain an accurate record, Weber replied. Because truth matters because somebody, historians will ask how Germany's lease could be so catastrophically wrong by Allied capabilities, and there shall be procurement ravens though everyone lit lines to reality. June 6, 1944, began for Von Schilling with a phone call at 3:47 a.m. His aide's voice was tense. General, you need to get to headquarters immediately. The invasion has started. Von Schilling arrived at the Western Command Center in Saint-Germain-en-Laye to find Ugaid Cass. Report footed in for Normandy Pantry Blaine, Neil Buncodman, on the Izots first multiple beaches. Was crowded ran maps, trying to determine the invasion scale and primary objectives. Von Schilling studied the incoming reports with growing alarm. This wasn't a probing attack or diversionary operation. The Allies were committing massive forces across a broad front. Naval gunfire was described as unprecedented intensity. Air cover was reported as absolute. No Luftwaffe planes observed. By noon, reconnaissance reports from the coast painted a picture that Von Schilling found almost impossible to credit. The English Channel was filled with ships. Observers reported counting over 1,000 vessels visible from single vantage points. The sky roared with continual Allied aircraft. Landing beaches were described as carpeted with vehicles, tanks, trucks, amphibious carriers covering every meter of sand. Von Schilling commanded mobile operations on the Eastern Front. He knew what large-scale mechanized warfare looked like. The descriptions coming through Normandy exceed anything he experienced or imagined. By evening, the reports became more detailed. Once time, Allied forces successfully lagged on Fars beaches and pushing inland. John Cantwatides had failed to reach the coast. Allied naval gunfire lärschreckst vor rearmer, for shot detected approached. One report stopped from shelling cold. A reconnaissance officer described observing Allied vehicle offloading operations at Gold Beach. Continuous string vehicles driving directly on specialized landing ships. Kathiv one vehicle every 45 seconds across multiple landing ports. Raped. Allies are landing approximately 2,000 vehicles daily at Vingle Beach. Sewer operations observed across offload beaches. Von Schelling did the arithmetic automatically. 2,000 vehicles per day per beach, across 5 beaches. 10,000 vehicles per day. In 1 week, the I landed 70,000 vehicles. In 2 weeks, 140,000. He remembered these conversations with Weber 6 months earlier. We had addicted 50,000 to 80,000 vehicles in the first 2 weeks. That rate or exceeding Weber's realistic estimates. Weber learned about the invasion while at his Bendler block office, compiling his usual daily intelligence summaries. By mid-morning June 6th, fragmentary reports from France were being circulated through Wehrmacht headquarters. Weber read them with a sick feeling of vindication. Everything he predicted was happening. Everything his superiors had dismissed as implausible was manifesting as reality. The scale of Allied material deployment exceeded even his estimates. He'd calculated Allied vehicle landing capacity at approximately 8,000 to 10,000 per day across all beaches combined. Actual observations suggested rates closer to 12,000 per day. By June 8th, Wehrmacht intelligence estimated the Allied forces had already landed over 30,000 vehicles in Normandy. The number seemed implausible. German units would require months to transport 30,000 vehicles over similar distances, even without enemy introduction. Yet there it was in the reports, described by multiple independent observers. More disturbing, those 30,000 vehicles were just the beginning. Reconnaissance photographs showed hundreds more ships approaching the invasion beaches. The vehicle landing operation showed no signs of slowing. Weber compiled a new report, documenting the observed Allied logistical capabilities and comparing them to his pre-invasion projections. His projections had been accurate within 15 Zen. He submitted the report through Charles on June 10th, not affecting any response. To his pride, he was summoned to brief Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel on June 12th. Weber had never met Keitel personally. The chief of the Wehrmacht High Command was his most loyal military subject, known for his absolute obedience to the Führer's directives, regardless of military realities. The meeting was brief and tense. Keitel sat behind an enormous desk in RV, waving a port open for him. 2 stewardesses stood nearby. Keitel, beyond up primo. Your poor his acts you predicted the scale I'll just gabaricious annullity with virile accuracy. Yes, Field Marshal. My pre-invasion estimates were based on, I've read your methodology. Keitel's voice was cold. What I want to know is why these estimates when given more weight operational plan. Weber chose the word carefully. My preach was admitted through poor Charles. The conclusions were deemed overly pessimistic by officers who reviewed them. Overly pessimistic. Keitel's repetition dripped with contempt. Though whether directed at Weber or those who dismissed his work, Weber couldn't tell. The Allies have landed at 40,000 vehicles in 6 days, Colonel. Your overly pessimistic estimates are proving consarta. Yes, Field Marshal. Keitel leaned forward. Give me a word to Iman. Can we fit that evasion? Weber, though this was the murder. He could provide comfortable assurances, preserve his career, tell a Field Marshal what he wanted to hear, or he could tell the truth. No, Field Marshal, we cannot. Silent, Phil Daffett. The Darth officers exchanged glances. Bane, Keitel said quietly. The I possess material superiority the approximately 8 to 1 individual. Himmler ratio the Otui. In absolute air superiority makes our ard movement by tailot suicide. They can sustain these ratios indefinitely through continuous shipping operations. Germany can't match Allied vehicle replacement rates, even if we transferred our entire main production to Western Front. We're facing industrial capacity against which military alone insufficient. Usain Germany surrender. Einstein mathematics dictate aufgrund regarding ideology alteration. The Allies tend to losses we inflict. While replacing their losses faster than we can inflict them, they can advance, store, absorb casualties, regroup, and attack again because their logistical capacity is effectively unlimited. We can't do the same. Each German loss is irreplaceable. Each Allied loss is temporary. Another long firings. Then Keitel spoke, his voice heavy with something that might have been resignation. Your report is noted, Colonel. That will be all. Weber saluted left. Certain he career though. At Mimmen, each beat a reassignment to a thought-light youth and offices delivered and work countries, often found themselves transferred to positions where their inconvenient honesty could be silenced by enemy action. Instead, nothing happened. He remained as Bendler back office, continuing his work, filing daily intelligence summaries that now document Allied advance as no one could deny. In July 1944, the Allied break-on from Normandy was accelerating. Operation Cobra punched through German defenses, and American armored divisions were racing across France at speeds that dwarfed the 1,940 Blitzkrieg. Von Schelling, still Inspector General of Western Panzer Forces, traveled to the front attempting to assess remaining defensive capacity. What he saw appalled German youths were being destroyed not through tactical inferiority but through material exhaustion. Panzer divisions fought brilliantly, ambushed Allied comms, executed textbook defensive operations, and then ran out of fuel, ammunition, or replacement parts, and had to abandon their positions or be annihilated. Meanwhile, Allied forces seemed to operate with logistical abundance that defined military logic. Destroyed Millikan tanks were replaced to language. Entire supply columns appeared overnight. Artillery barrages were maintained at intensities that consumed more ammunition in single engagements than German divisions had available for entire campaigns. Von Schelling watched American supply operations through binoculars from Richine Arthur Fanlor, an endless convoy of American trucks stretched to the Rhine, moving supply forward in times that made German agents look brain-destroyed by barbarian. He ended over 200 trucks per year Finkeltype in 20 mains. The Americans went at wings through superior mons, a wings through superior logistics. Their trucks didn't break down. Their fuel arrived on schedule. Their replacement parts were abundant. The vaunted German mechanical engineer expertise meant nothing when American vehicles, hardly inferior in quality, simply went reliably, while German tanks that utilized weight in their spare parts that never arrived. In August 1944, on Schelling's son to POWs for a more wide schedule, the Allied bridged a goal route. German forces were retreating toward the Seine River, attempting to establish new defensive lines that everyone knew wouldn't hold. At the conference, von Schelling encountered Weber again. The intelligence analyst looked exhausted, hollow-eyed for months watching his predictions materialize as catastrophe. Your numbers were right, von Schelling said firmly. Everything you warned about, the vehicle superiority, logistical capacity, the material abundance. It's exactly you calculating. Weber nodded, who took no satisfaction from the vindication. Do you Erica now form the vehicle to I-4s? At the current Leary actual numbers are poorly high. The particular military vehicle fought den differingen, even those optimistic command loss claims. 4,000, Varshali repeated nullly, while fighting Japan, while maintaining homeland defense, while supplying the Soviet Union. The Americans converted their automobile industry to military production in less than 18 months. They are continuing. Fort Willow Run plant alone produces one B-24 bomb every 63 minutes. General Motors manufactures more military trucks monthly than Germany produces in a year. And they're doing this while their civilian population maintains living standards Germany hasn't seen since before the war. Von Schelling poured them snaps from a boudoir conference table. We never had a chance, did we? Not once America ended the war, fall and industry mobilization. No, Weber agreed. Germany might have survived Land war with controlled objectives. A total war against an enemy with America's industrial base and resources. The outcome was mathematically predetermined from 1942 onward. Other event has been delay inability. The part Kivens broke up revived region minute wars. What can be controlled? That Germany with Lune war could never have won. That Allied material superiority was insurmountable. It years of suffering and sacrifice had been pursued strategic impossibility. By end of 1944, Allied forces liberated Paris and were approaching Germany's western border. Soviet forces with a spurring army grew center and aperture the Reich's eastern frontiers. Italy commanded. Atlantic wall had been breached. A over was channeled. The Kriegsmarine was bottled in ports, and still the American vehicles kept arriving. Weber's intelligence summaries documented 450,000 by October 1944, then 500,000 by 500. The number climbed, while Germany's production capacity collapsed under Allied buying. Weber sat in his Berlin office in December 1944, compiling what he knew would be Weber's final reports. Soviet artillery could be heard in the distance. The war was clearly lost. Germany's cities were rubble. Its armies were disintegrating. Yet his job remained. Count the numbers, document the reality, maintain the record. His final calculation showed that American vehicle delivery to our forces exceeded 320,000 heads by year's end 1944. This represented more vehicles than Germany had produced in its entire history prior to 1933. Weber wrote in his concluding paragraph, American industrial capacity exceeded German planning assumptions by margins that made military resistance strategically futile from 1942 onward. This conclusion was evident in production data available by mid-1943, but was rejected by senior command due to ideological preconceptions about American capability. Strategic planning based on wishful thinking rather than empirical assessment produced catastrophic consequences that no amount of tactical excellence could overcome. He filed a report, knowing it would not be read by anyone who could have acted on when action mattered. The record existed no lies. Sunday, perhaps, it would answer historians' questions about how an entire military leadership could have been so fundamentally wrong about the enemy they faced. In April 1945, with Soviet forces blocks away and Berlin collapsing into chaos, Weber destroyed most of his files. He kept only a single leather portfolio containing his key reports and statistical analyses, evidence that Fungwin Wehrmacht had understood the tree, even if no one had listened. The war ended on May 8, 1945. Weber survived, was briefly interned by American forces, eventually released. The intelligence role was determined to be unlegal, rather than operation. They met restoring wigs on country German document, and modeled in hundreds faved the Adviad commanders to WWII particularly mervative above, so Kai Schreigli. They would rise by ideological bias, wishful thinking, and strategic delusion. Few would note the small analytical section that had accurately assessed American industrial capacity, predicted Allied logistical superiority, and warned of strategic impossibility. Weber's reports existed in archives, largely unexamined footnotes to a catastrophe. Von Schelling also survived the war, surrendered to American forces in April 1945, and spent 3 years in a POW camp. During interrogations, American intelligence officers asked him about German defensive planning for the Normandy invasion. We planned to fight an enemy we understand, Von Schelling called his interrogators. We prepared for an invasion we could conceptually defeat. What arrived on those beaches was something else entirely: industrial capacity, weaponized on a scale we had no framework to comprehend. You didn't win because your soldiers were better than ours. You won because you brought so many vehicles, so much ammunition, so much fuel, that our tactical excellence became irrelevant. You could afford mistakes we couldn't. You could sustain advances we couldn't stop, not because we didn't not, but because mathematics doesn't care about courage. The American officer conducting the interrogation paused his note-taking. You sound like you're not surprised we won. I've known since June 7th, 1944, a Germany would lose. Von Schelling replied. I probably should known do 1943, when Helican Alley sure a production figure I didn't ought to believe. The tragedy is so many men died in the year when no one accepting. The story of how America sent over 300,000 vehicles to Allied forces while simultaneously fighting Japan never became a celebrated narrative of the war. There were no dramatic films made about logistics officers and production statistics. The men who built trucks in Detroit and shipped them to Liverpool went remembered like the men who stormed beaches and liberated cities. But in the cramped Berlin office where Colonel FriedrichzWeber had spent 3 years documenting Officerlin Lee, and in the French hedgerows where General Kurt von Schelling had watched American supply columns that stretched to the horizon, the real verdict to the war was written in numbers that deny Germany lost World War II and May battlefields and through countless factors. But perhaps it was lost to February in the arithmetic that Colonel Wehr compiled in 1943 arithmetic that shall America's industrial colossus produced in one carried right that made German victory mathematically impossible. The officers who had dismissed those calculations learned the truth in the skies over Normandy filled with aircraft, on beaches covered with aircraft, the endless supply comms the first Allied advances knew to how many kinds German forces struck them. By the time they do Weber's numbers had meant, it was far too late to matter. The final irony was in. Germany spent years being told America was weak, industrially inferior, strategically incoherent. When reality arrived on June 6, 1944, it arrived in such overwhelming material abundance that German defenders could only watch in shock. Everything they believed was proven catastrophically, irreversibly wrong. The numbers had never lied. Only the men reading had refused to see what they meant. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to post, subscribe,